In this series, FreeforAll, we're talking about 4 ideas that help people move towards the freedom God created them for. Let's quickly review the first 3 ideas. We've said that freedom starts in your mind with believing in what's possible. Courage is the currency of freedom, and freedom starts now and with you. To summarize each idea with one word, it might look like this: belief, courage, choice. These words pack a lot of power. The world, the whole world, not just our personal world, can be changed by these 3 words. What we're going to talk about today may not feel as powerful and world-changing as those words do, but in my opinion, there's nothing more vital when it comes to your personal freedom. Today, we're going to talk about not giving up. I've journeyed with a lot of people who have lived deep in oppression for many years. When they finally encounter God and find the courage to make a choice towards freedom, they're usually really excited. There's a euphoric feeling when you start on the journey to freedom. The trouble is the feeling wears off. The euphoria fades and it becomes a lot of work, hard work. I had a friend who was 3 months into a recovery program. She spent those 3 months in a beautiful home with a bunch of other women. It included a regimen of exercise and eating well and group therapy, prayer, and all kinds of things that fed her hungry soul. Then she got her own place and moved in. She was ecstatic for a few weeks at the idea of starting fresh, and then it hit her. The bills came and her job started and the loneliness crept back in, and she started to feel things for the first time. And she had dreams at night reminding her of the good old days where drinking would take the edge off and ensure a fun time. She called me up one night. We talked for a long time on the phone. She told me that she understood that it was going to be hard and that she was prepared for the long haul. She was praying for the courage that wouldn't be fickle or easy or short term. She wanted to live a life, a meaningful, long life of freedom. She surrendered on the phone to the presence of God in the midst of the hard walk and the overwhelming feeling that she wasn't going to make it, and she felt God draw near. I asked her a few years later at her 5-year sobriety mark what had made the difference for her. She said asking for help, God's presence through prayer, and friends who walked with her the whole way, and keeping the goal in front of her. You see, my friend's journey into sobriety is a long one. It actually parallels our journey into freedom in a lot of ways. Just like my friend's early sobriety, we can experience a euphoria to our decision to get free. We can see the payoffs to our freedom. For example, losing the first 5 pounds on a new diet. Somehow it just doesn't always make it possible to lose another 5 pounds. Sometimes we go right back to the habits that made us start that diet in the first place. I don't know what it is for you, but if I were to ask you, why would it be amazing for you to break free in the area where you feel enslaved? What would you say? How you answer that usually includes your payoffs. But just like developing a new life of sobriety or a long-term new way of eating healthy, the journey to freedom is not a short-term fix. It's a long journey of learning to live another way. And it's not easy, and it's tempting to give up. We all probably know 1 or 2 people who describe their journey to freedom with different variations of phrases like, I was a heavy smoker for 10 years, but when I found out we were pregnant with our first child, I threw away my cigarettes and haven't thought about them since. Or, my doctor told me to change my diet if I wanted to live to see my grandkids graduate. In that moment, things changed instantly and they never went back. I went to church one night. I went to the altar and laid down my addictions, and I haven't touched drugs since. I've never even had the urge. I'm not saying stuff like this doesn't happen. It does. And actually, I pray it happens more and more. I'm not discrediting the validity of these people and their life experience. Scripture is full of examples of this sort of thing, like how God blinded Paul, who was known as Saul at the time, on the road to Damascus, and he ultimately becomes the greatest missionary the world's ever seen. God truly can turn slavery into freedom instantly. But for every one person I know who has a story like this, I know 100 others who share their story using words like journey, process, road, path, adventure. In adjectives like difficult, extensive, rocky, unending. Immediate change can happen, but gradual and slow change is more likely for most people. As we discussed last time, there's a day that becomes the day for people, the day they choose to become free. But after the choice comes the journey. And that journey can be a difficult, extensive, rocky, and unending one. Not exactly encouraging news. In fact, just hearing that might make you want to give up. But I'm not trying to discourage you. The point is that the journey is going to be long, and it may involve steps forward and a few steps backwards. I just don't want you to be surprised when it feels like an unending journey, or be frustrated if a 6-week small group series doesn't cure you from your oppression. I mean, think about it. You and I have spent a lot of time investing in our oppression. Whether it's an internet habit, an alcohol problem, a pride problem, or an anxiety issue, we've spent a lot of years learning to be addicted to that thing or that way of thinking. We've invested a lot into what enslaves us. That's why it'll take a lot of time, energy, and maybe years to get us out. This isn't just true for your oppression. The same is true for oppression around the world. The fight against things like sex trafficking isn't one that's going to be won instantly. It's going to be a long, grueling fight. But here's the good news about the long journey to freedom. There will be some good stuff that develops in us during that long walk towards freedom. When I think about the people I know have journeyed a long time in their quest for freedom from bad habits, addictions, or unhealthy patterns of thought or behavior, I rarely hear one of them describe their path as one they regret. Some of them regret being enslaved in the first place, but there's never regret for making the journey to freedom. Instead, they talk about how grateful they are. They talk about how much they've learned about themselves in the process. They talk about how much they value the people who've walked with them. They talk about how much wisdom they've gained that they would have missed out on otherwise. Not only that, but the long walk towards freedom brings us back to the dependency of faith. It's a reminder that this whole freedom thing isn't riding on us and our ability to keep at it. God is often more invested in our freedom than we are, and we never walk the path toward freedom alone. The Apostle Paul, whose change came in an instant, didn't walk on a road without obstacles after his conversion to follow Jesus. In his second letter to the Corinthians, he wrote, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I've labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? Not exactly a walk in the park. And this was just the beginning. In fact, in the next chapter, Paul continued to share more challenges that he faced on his journey. He wrote about a thorn in the flesh, a hardship he didn't reveal the details about, but pleaded with God to take it away. This is Paul, the most famous Christian of all time, struggling with something deeply personal and intense in his spiritual journey. But here's why I think Paul shared about the hardships he faced. I think he did it because he knew this to be true. We boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings. Paul started by saying that we have hope in God, hope in the glory of God. And God is all about our freedom. He loves freedom and seeks it for all of us. So when we're hoping in His glory, we're hoping that His goodness, His freedom spreads everywhere. So when we're having hope in the glory of God, we're having hope in His freedom. And then in the second part of the verse, Paul writes about suffering. Think about the difficulties that surround the journey to freedom, the setbacks, the hurt, the struggle to get unbound. But Paul wrote something kind of odd about sufferings. He wrote that we glory in them. That means that we embrace the suffering. We embrace the long road to freedom. But why would anyone do that? Paul answered that question in the next few verses. He wrote, "We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us." I think Paul understood that when it comes to finding freedom, we'll all face obstacles. We'll all encounter struggles. It won't always be easy. Freedom isn't found by avoiding the long road. Freedom is found by continuing to put one foot in front of the other. And Paul shared that the long road to finding freedom produces some good things in us. Paul said that the more we face the suffering that the path to freedom can create, the more perseverance it will produce in us, the more character it produces in us, the more hope it produces in us. and the deeper understanding of God's love it will produce in us. And those are really, really good things. To find freedom, our oppression needs to be dealt with, not avoided. Choosing to keep walking and to keep enduring has the power to unlock the chains. And in the meantime, as we walk the journey towards freedom, God will grow some really wonderful things in us. In fact, if you listen to people who have walked with God for a long time, I bet that when they share their story, the statement Paul made is very real to them. I bet they can tell you in great detail how the long journey developed perseverance and character and hope and a deeper sense of God's presence and love with them and in them. For you and I to break free, our journey is going to be long, grueling, challenging, and inconsistent. But if we never give up, if we keep moving forward, we'll have the opportunity to experience God's grace and power in a depth that we would have never known otherwise. The road to freedom can feel overwhelming and long. Sometimes it can feel impossible. That's the bad news. But the good news is that's exactly where God will meet you with more of Himself to keep you going. When we read accounts of people who've made massive impacts for good in human history, there's a common theme. They didn't give up. I mean, think of Nelson Mandela and his quest to end apartheid in South Africa. Or think of Mother Teresa and her day in and day out service of the poor and the sick. Or think of dozens of others heroes we know about and the countless others who existed whose names we'll never know, but who were relentless in their quest for good. Some are smart, some weren't as smart, some were born with influence, some had none, some were surrounded by supporters, some stood alone. But none of the people who created change stopped. They kept going despite the setbacks and the obstacles. Practically speaking, here are 4 things that can help you over time develop that same grit that history makers and oppression overcomers have had. Number 1, live like a free person. Don't associate yourself with your oppression as if that's who you are. Act as if that's outside of how you were created and what you were made for. Freedom may feel foreign to you, but live like the person God created you to be. You don't know what hangs in the balance of choosing freedom today. Number 2, stop letting fear lead. God's with you. That's not a church cliche. That's a truth that when you let the reality of it sink in, should change the fear conversation in your mind. It doesn't mean you won't feel fear. Just go with God towards it and know you aren't alone in facing it. Number 3, do something today. I call them small acts of freedom. It's the next right step. It's one thing you can do or focus on today that'll help you gain a little more freedom on a daily basis. The great part about sticking with it, never giving up on your own journey towards freedom, is that eventually you realize that if you can be free, anybody, everywhere, can be free. Your own personal quest for personal freedom is an indication that you were made for something more, which means everyone else is too. So when you refuse to give up on your journey towards freedom, you can help others break free as well. You can help others realize the power of God's goodness and grace. Can you imagine the legacy of a life like that? A legacy of a life where you help others experience God's freedom? It's one of the payoffs of freedom that we rarely think about. Imagine being in a place where you help people get on their journey towards freedom. Remember, finding freedom requires perseverance, but freedom isn't just for us. It's for us to share with the world around us. Freedom starts in your mind with believing in what's possible. Courage is the currency of freedom. Freedom starts now and with you. Finding freedom requires perseverance. Belief, courage, choice, perseverance. See, you were made for freedom.